All right, well, welcome back to the Open Bible, Open Life podcast. I'm Kyle Mercer, and it is the day of the Heights Conference. We're launching the Heights tonight.
Come on.
But before we do, I've got my friend and a Canadian and
Yes.
now a Californian,
Yes.
however we
Is
say
there a
it.
better, is there a better podcast host name than Kyle Mercer?
It's
I
strong.
mean, it's a
Come on, dude. In Open Bible,
it's a
Open Life.
strong name with Kyle Mercer.
With Kyle Mercer and Mark Clark.
That's
I mean,
the
it rhymes.
Mark Clark is possibly
it's
the
one,
worst name
they're both
ever
ones-
given to a human being in the history of time.
Did you get made fun of as a kid?
No,
for the
but
name
I
Mark
should
Clark?
have.
I mean, it's
My
so,
parents, what were they thinking? It's like, it rhymes, guys. If
They're
I
both
could
one
talk
syllable.
When I came out, I'd be like, bro, you gotta call this off. This is ridiculous.
So you were born.
Yes, I was born.
You were born. Yes,
Yes,
yes, you were born.
Yes.
Okay, that's great. Okay,
And they called
you-
me Mark Clark.
And
what
then
the heck?
And you were born in Canada,
Yes, the country of Canada.
America's hat, Toronto.
America's hat. Is that what you call
that's
it?
What I just,
Okay,
I'm
yeah,
just kidding.
sure,
I was
sure.
just in Canada.
Yeah. America's
Tell me
hat.
about
America's brain.
Tell me.
I just thought of that right now. It's
That's
kinda
good, it's
funny.
good.
Yeah, you guys are just like down here. Doing whatever.
Yeah. You're the brains up there.
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
so Toronto, you grew up there. Tell me about it.
Toronto, yeah. Great.
Because you got to understand, the average person listening to this is going to be in America, in North Carolina, in
They've
Winston-Salem.
never been to Canada.
They've never been to
I've met
Canada.
I've lived in America now for 2.5 years, and I've met enough Americans who have never, ever been to Canada.
And never plan on going.
They all say, oh, the cold and the bears and the walruses. And it's like, no. It's like some of the most beautiful cities in the world. You know, so I lived 18 years in Vancouver, which is on the Pacific Northwest, of course,
Yes.
2 hours drive from Seattle. And so picture a clean, beautiful, nice Seattle.
Wow.
So see, a city right on the water, the Pacific Ocean, a glass city surrounded by mountains where when you go out of your little boat, when you're going over the island, there's orcas jumping all around, and you play golf and ski up at Whistler in the same day, and everyone's laughing. And I'm like, where do you live again? They're like, Sacramento. I'm like, yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Anyway, so it's a beautiful, beautiful country. I mean, it's like the West Coast is like, it's like you're living in Middle Earth.
Well,
It's unreal.
well, I heard it said that if Christopher Columbus would have landed on the West Coast, we would have never discovered the East Coast because it's just so unbelievably beautiful.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. It's.
I don't know if you ever heard
yeah.
that. Anyway, you're like, I don't know if
It
that's
is
true.
unbelievable. It is beautiful. So yeah, Toronto, suburbs of Toronto, like not downtown. Like,
Yeah.
You know,
But
and,
tell it.
so-
I want to hear
yeah.
your spiritual story. How did you grow up in Toronto? How do you become a Christian? What's life like in Toronto?
Yeah, so
Growing up.
so I non-Christian family, didn't walk into a church till I was 19. Talk about my name. So my dad was such just an ardent atheist, like did not love the concept of God, Christianity, anything, was totally against it, to the point where I have a brother 4 years older than me. My mom proposes to my dad that they name my brother Matthew, okay. Which ends up being his name. And my dad originally says absolutely not, because that's a Bible name. That I know that's in the Bible. Okay?
Well, he obviously doesn't know much about Mark then.
So 4 years later, they have me and name me Mark. So clearly this guy's never picked up a Bible. My middle name is Andrew. My brother's middle name is James. So we got 4 disciples. We got 4 Bible guys, and my dad's just walking around. Anyways, so my parents divorced. I'm 8 or 9. He dies when I'm 15. Kind of sad story. And anyway, I'm 18 years old. A guy walks into one of my classes in high school, tells me about Jesus, and I'd had some, a couple other kind of seeds planted through summer camps and other things when I was a kid. And I said, yeah, I got to give my life to Jesus. And I was doing all the, the stuff that you do without Jesus in your life.
Yeah.
First time I probably did drugs, I was, 10 years old. Guy gave
Wow.
it to me in my neighborhood. And it's not like I became an addict or anything, but it was like, okay, I'm doing the party thing, all of that. Meet Jesus, totally transforms. And here's what I like to say. Jesus doesn't transform what you do. He transforms what you want to do. And what happened with me is my affections changed.
Amen.
The things that I took pleasure in, the things I wanted to do, changed from all the stuff to the stuff that God was calling me to. So I just got lit up for Jesus, reading the Bible every day, telling everybody in my school about Jesus. I'm still chain smoking. Hey guys, come here. I want to tell you about the Gospels. I'm like, and I'm walking around my town. I'm baptizing dudes who are coming to Christ at 2:00 in the morning around my neighborhood. Like I was on fire. God just kind of.
You're 18, 19 years old.
Yeah.
Wow.
So anyway, then I did 2 years of that, and then I said, I should probably go to a church. And I didn't want to go to a church because like what I'd thought about church, what I heard about churches, the stereotype was, it was going to be orange shag carpet. Everyone was going to be 200 years old, and it was going to smell like mothballs. And I was like, the first church I ever walked into was exactly like that. But there was hot girls there, and I was like, okay, thank you, Jesus. I'm into the church. So I was like, hook me up. This is great. So I started going and met who would would go on to be my wife. We started dating, and some people started to pour into my life and say, you should become a pastor. And I was like, what? I was like, what? I was like, what are you talking about? And I wanted to go into the film industry. That was my real passion. So ever since I was a kid, I'm a big movie guy, write, direct, screenplay, acting, all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, that's why I was just doing the.
Tell the story.
Okay, so I got here, and your sound guy, we were doing a sound check for the conference, and your sound guy says, do you have any scriptures memorized that you could like riff off for our sound check? And I kind of looked at him, and I'm like, no. And then he's like, okay, do you have like some kind of speech? And I'm like, oh yeah. And then I riffed a 3-minute Al Pacino speech off the top of my head, but I couldn't remember Philippians 3.
And from Any Given Sunday, or what's the movie called?
Yeah, Any Given Sunday.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So then it ended, and then you said, give him the Good Will Hunting one. So then I gave Good Will Hunting for, of course, they're all adapted to like the Christian version with not a lot of swearing. So anyway, that's what I wanted to do with my life, and I did, and people said, we think you're supposed to be a pastor and a preacher. I'm like, no, that can't be a thing, because can you agree people are the worst?
People are the worst. That's kind of
why would I want to be a pastor? People are.
Oh, you mean dealing with people?
It's too loud. Start a singles ministry for me and my friends. It's like, get a life.
As you think about what
your own life out, man. I'm trying to run a church here.
As you think about what you'd have to deal with as a pastor, you're like, that's the last thing I want to do.
That's the last thing I want to do.
Yeah. Have you changed how you view people? No, that's still how you view
that's what I'm saying. I met a guy, I tell my churches, I met you guys in the foyer the other day, I shake your hand. I'm like, my name's Frank. I'm like, great, delete. I'm like, this is going to be irrelevant information about 16 minutes. I don't remember your name.
Yes.
Because there's just so much I got to remember. I can't, like your name and your family's history and all this stuff. So I'm not going to be a good pastor is the point. So
that's what you were thinking. Okay.
Yeah, I was like, I don't want to do this. So anyway, God said, yeah.
But you do love people, and you are a pastor today. Tell us how you got there.
Okay, so I became a pastor, and then I started, kind of leaning into the preaching piece of it. And then through a big experience that would take way too long, God called me to plant a church. So it wasn't only just pastoring, it's now going to start a church in Vancouver. So I'd moved to Vancouver with my wife to get into education. Well,
because you're at an event. We talked about this a little bit last night. I just wanted to hear, because Village Church, the church that you pastored for a decade, became one of the most influential churches in Canada, kind of put you on the map for book writing. We can get into all that. But you are at an event, and you basically feel the call to plant a church. Just tell that story briefly.
Wife and I got married, drive across to Vancouver, where we'd never met a soul, so we knew nobody. And
you went there to go to Regent.
Regent College, do a 2-year master's degree, and then I wanted to go overseas to Oxford and do a PhD and become a professor, precisely because of what I said.
Professor Mark Clark, Dr. Mark Clark.
Yes.
Add something to Mark Clark.
Exactly. So yes, because just by itself, it's so bland. It's like 2 syllables. Like, anyway, so that's what I wanted to do with my life, and then we got to Vancouver. We were there for a few years, and had our first daughter. And then God just said, I want you to stay here. And then I went to an event. A couple of guys were preaching on some stuff, and it was like all the lights went down, and it was just me and these 2 speakers in a room, and they were talking about church planting, and they were saying, if you want to really change Canada, what you need to do is you need to saturate the 3 strategic, influential cities in your country, Vancouver, Toronto, and Montreal, and gospel-centered churches, because all culture and media and fashion and thought and ideas and laws are in those cities, and then it will go downstream.
I remember when I said that to you.
Yes, that was very inspirational talk you gave. So it was like right there, God was like, he's talking about you. You're supposed to start these churches. And I'm like, start a church? I'd go into a church that was half empty. The building was made for 3,000. There was probably 400 people in it. And I just went, I was the young adult pastor at the time. So I drove home, went to my wife, and just said, I think we're supposed to start a church. So at that point, the seed was there. We didn't have a lead pastor at the time, so we waited until we got that. I didn't want to harm the church at all. So anyway, bottom line is created a plan where over the course of a year or 2, we would kind of transition. We would start this church about 35 minutes away. And if this church would give me like 35 people, then I'll go and I'll start. So that's what we did. Gave me 35 people. And I got up on their stage and I said, I don't want to see any of you at this church because you don't want to harm the church you're planting out of, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, if you show up to this church, I will shame you at the front door to come back here because I'm not starting a church so you can go, yeah, I'm going to go to this, or I'm going to whatever. So we're going to reach these people, 35 people. They're all on stage with me. No one else is welcome. And so we got there, started preaching about Jesus, and it just started to take off after about a year or so. It started to get a lot of momentum, and God did some really cool things.
And I want to talk about that because you and I were talking last night about your gift set, how God uniquely uses different people and personalities. And so you would say, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You can help me correct this, but you have both a passion for, and our church will know what this is, expositional, expository, verse by verse preaching. You, for example, did 3 years through the book of Matthew.
Yeah.
At the same time, you have a kind of, I don't know, an eye and an ear and a heart for the seeker and the skeptic.
Yeah.
How do you do both? You know, what Andy Stanley has famously called double barrel preaching. How do you take people deeper in discipleship while at the same time, you know, reaching new people? You and we'll get into your books too, but you've done that effectively. Give us, like, if there is such a thing as hacks or mindsets.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, I mean, there's a whole preaching course that Kerry Newhoff and I did on this, and literally I spend like 2 hours talking about the mechanics of how to do this. But it all kind of comes down to like almost just putting a filter on that says every time you're prepping a sermon, who is it that you have in mind? Well, if you have in your brain a Christian, then you're gonna preach a certain way, right? Hey, you're gonna assume a lot of things. So, for God so loved the world, I do know one Bible verse. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. Okay,
Yes.
so for God, okay, stop, everybody. So, hey, if you're a Buddhist and you're here, if you're a Muslim and you're here, I'm really glad you're here because you're exploring Jesus, and we're really glad you're here as a church. But when I say the word God to you, you think I mean this. But actually what John's meaning is this. Great. So for God so loved. Now hold up. Now, if you're an agnostic and you're an atheist and you're here, we're super glad you're here. Now, here's the thing. When I say loved, you think of a Jennifer Aniston movie where they're all falling in love and your belly's like, yee, butterflies, and she made me feel so nice. And that's what you think about. But that's not actually what John means by the word love. What he means is And all of a sudden, as you're doing now, this takes a while because that's why it took me 3.5 years to preach through Matthew, because I get 3 words in and the 45 minutes are up.
Yes.
But you're talking to all these different people, and all of a sudden, here's what happens. The more even if you know, let's say you have a church of 300 people. If you know every single one of them by name, you baptize all of them, they're uber Christians, they've never watched a rated R movie in their life, they're perfect people, and they're sitting in front of you, and you know that. If you talk like that, over time, those people will start to come. Because those people that are sitting in front of you will start to invite their Buddhist friend their Muslim friend and their neighbors who are agnostic. If you never talk to those people, they'll never show up, because why would they? All you're talking to is the Christians every week. And you know how to rally the Christians. It's easy to preach to Christians. It's like throwing meat to lions, right? You can just throw all the little phrases and the little on the Christians. Yeah. And they make noise and makes you feel good as a preacher. Oh, they gave me an amen. Oh, yeah. And you know the phrases that are going to jack your people up. And if you spend 45 minutes every week just jacking the Christians up, the skeptic's never going to show up. So it's like, okay, how do I take the Bible, which we believe is the most relevant, awesome, life-changing, transformative book on the planet, and make it live in their life instantly every single week, even if it's challenging their worldview or their behavior or their whatever. So it's just week in, week out, just doing that for 40 minutes. And over time, all these people started to show up. And anyway,
it's the principle that Keller talks about. Don't preach just to the people in the room. Preach to the people you want to be in the room, and they will 100%. Be in the room. Like,
or the great Keller paradigm is, and what I talk about in that preaching course is, you're preaching to the older brother and the younger brother every week. So in the prodigal son story, the younger irreligious, progressive guy who's banging all kinds of people and he doesn't care and he's spending his money on prostitutes, literally what the younger brother does. And you're preaching to him and you're telling him he's lost. And that he needs to repent, he needs to come back, and the Father's going to throw a party for him if he does believe in the sacrifice fattened calf on his behalf. But the older brother is the religious guy who reads Oswald Chambers every day, and he's never done anything wrong, and and he's just as lost, and he needs to repent today too this morning. And the tragedy of that story, of course, is the religious older brother is the one who stays out of the party. He never comes into the party. And it's a critique on the religious spirit and how you can be lost. You can go to church, raised in the church, die in the church, have your funeral in the church, and still wake up in hell because you never really knew him. And so that person is lost and needs to come to know Jesus. And every single week you do that. And over time, both groups start coming and getting on fire for Jesus. And, so that's what happened.
So that happens. And then that leads you to write, I don't know the whole story here, but you start to write some books. I want to talk about some of the books you've written because you like to deal with problems, I see. So the problem of God. Yeah, please tell me.
So this has been kind of a funny thing. So the first book was born out of the skepticism. And, there's books like it out there that are addressing kind of the top. So The Problem of God is the first book, came out in 2017. It's addressing the top kind of 10 questions that people have toward Christianity, right? Evil and suffering, the Bible, exclusivity, the hypocrisy of the church. We burn witches and we did the Crusades, ergo, I don't want to be a Christian. Science, the longest chapter in it is on sex, which is I've never read that in an apologetics book ever. The whole thing of the ethic of sex and how God isn't anti-sex. So I wrote that book 2017. Now, originally it was called something else. It was called Skeptic's Forum or something like that. And just before it got published, I read this quote by A.W. Tozer, which is on the back of the book. And it says, basically, I didn't memorize it, but too much Pacino in my head. Something along the lines of basically like, at the end of the day, all the problems of life in heaven and earth go away under the question of the problem of God, which of course he's using the problem as a math equation, not a problem. Like God's got a problem. It's the problem, like a math problem that needs to ergo be solved.
Yes.
Right? So I read that quote and I'm like, that's the title of my book right there. The problem of God. It's not the problem with God. It's the problem of God, which is he's a math equation that if you pay attention, you're going to have to solve the question of God in your life. And all of eternity is in the balance if you don't solve this problem among all of the problems you got to solve. So anyway, of course, everyone on Amazon hacks it and writes, there's no problem with God. There's a problem with you. You're like, all right, you're clearly not paying attention to what I'm trying to say here. Anyways, because my background is a little bit more artistic side of the brain. All the guys on our campus pastor thread, they all love sports and I get bored. So me and the movie guys and the art guys, we're over here and then they all go, oh my goodness, can you believe that guy threw a 14-yard pass? I can't believe It's like bored. And it's like, we're over here talking about what's the latest script coming out of this and what's the Dune cinematography doing with whatever. So anyways, so I love that kind of poetic and that gives room for the artistry of, I don't care that everyone's not going to understand the title a bit. So then I doubled down with a second book called The Problem of Jesus, not the problem with. Again, people misunderstand. Yeah. Oh, there's no problem with Jesus. You're a loser. It's like, no, the problem of Jesus. You've got to solve the problem of Jesus now. So we got God. Now we got Jesus. So the Gospels, did he exist? Discipleship, all that stuff. Miracle, whole chapter on miracles, using a lot of C.S. Lewis stuff. And so that was the second book. And now the last book of the trilogy.
It's going to be there's not going to be a fourth. There's not going to be
I can't see myself writing a fourth problem, though if I did, it would probably be called The Problem of Grace. See, so the third book is called The Problem of Life. And the problem
which has not come out yet.
February.
Okay.
And if every person listening to this podcast buys one, I
would
will
buy
make
3
$18.
copies. Yeah, that's right.
I'm kidding. I'm sure. No, but I think it will be super helpful to anyone who reads it because
give us some
it's about the problem of, what it sounds like, but origins, identity, purpose, suffering, meaning, joy, death in a disenchanted world. How do you find your own identity? It's basically life, all of life, the longing, the problem of the soul. Had all these kind of different iterations of what do you even title this? At one point it was going to be kind of the problem of longing of the soul, but it started to get into I do a whole thing on the origins of human. So it's kind of it's an anthropology. It's like the human experience. What is all this?
Yes.
Why do you long? What do you do with all the suffering and pain that you experience in life? You're a Jordan Peterson fan. So one of the things that the Problem of Life actually does is it filters down to 11, it's not rules or it's more like principles that I could sit someone down and say, look up, not in. Prepare yourself for death. Every chapter is do this and so that you flourish in this thing called life versus flounder in this thing called life. How are you going to suck the marrow out of life and be an amazing, joyous, content, successful human being, all of that. If you remove God from your life, the anxiety, the stress, the suicide, all the stuff we're dealing with, it's like, let's remove God from our life. Ergo, you're bearing the weight of your own identity, your purpose, your joy. You can't, the human being can't flourish like this. Anyways, so the book is about all of that and a whole bunch of stuff. So the problem of life, and that's probably going to be the trilogy, unless my publisher says, no, we need a fourth one because it's just
the problem of grace. Maybe
we can't.
It was on the open
7-part Harry Potter.
It was on the Open Bible, Open Life podcast. We didn't know that it was going to explode.
We didn't know it was going to explode.
Yes,
it's unbelievable. Now we need 7 of these. So the thing is I wrote a chapter in The Problem of Life called The Problem of Grace, and I removed it and because it's a really big and it's going to end up in book 4, which I think is probably, I'm working with Zondervan on, and it'll probably be called Beauty Will Save the World. But I took it out of that book, and so if I was really forced to a fourth one, I could probably write a whole book on grace, which I'm going to be talking about tonight, the concept of imperfect people being used by a very perfect God, and how that is just completely messed up in regard to the religious schema.
Yes.
Yeah.
What is your favorite chapter in this new book? Like, of all the chapters, like, man,
say, what's my favorite chapter in the Bible?
No, in your newest book, because we don't have it yet. But like, when you're like, man, people are going to be reading it, and this is the chapter that I'm like, this is the bullseye.
It's a great question, because sometimes my answer to that. So I've had 3 people read the book, and all of them had different answers to that question. They loved a lot of the stuff on purpose and identity. So I actually used Peterson's whole, you have to carry a burden.
Yes.
That whole thing. You have to learn how to read, because the state, you need to be sharp. You need to be able to, you got to be able to fight for the people around. You think, and if you don't carry a burden, you're not going to have an identity, because, there's nothing scarier than the man who goes to bed not tired, or, that whole concept of like, there actually is a burden to bear, and there's stuff to do, and God has given us work to do, and we better be on with it,
Yes. And Peterson's whole point is, when suffering comes, which is inevitable,
right,
your hedonism will not be enough in that moment. You're going to need meaning, which comes from bearing burdens.
And I talk about about that concept of this is why people will leave jobs that aren't challenging enough, because the human spirit is actually created for the tension.
Yes.
And the thorns and thistles is post-fall, right? So a lot of the book is kind of this Genesis 1, Genesis 2, 3. What does all this have to do with being human? Of course, we're made in the image of God, but we're not an animal, and we're not an angel. We live as this weird fusion of both, and so how do we deal? We live on the other side of the fall, and yet we were designed by God and His sovereignty to be able to handle the crisis of suffering and all that. So everyone that reads it has a different kind of vibe. There's a section of it that when people read the book, they all want to talk about, and there's a section on don't look in but look up, and it's this concept of post-fall New Ageism, and secular philosophy tells you to look inside yourself to solve yourself, and da-da-da. But I talk about the idea that in the garden, what we were doing is we were tempted with not being human. Being human's a limit, and I don't like this limit, so I want to be like a god. Of course, is what Satan says to Adam and Eve. And so the 2 examples I give of that are transhumanism and transgenderism. So I talk about those 2 topics as humankind basically saying, the limitation of my life is driving me not to settle here. I want to actually get more out of than I'm supposed to. And so transhumanism, of course, is this movement of, where are we going as human beings? Neuralink, and put everyone in because imagine you are omniscient. Imagine just by thinking you can get all the information of the internet into your brain, and you can all of a sudden there's this, and so there's a book written years ago called Sapiens, and the guy's last chapter is all about, okay, the next step in our human evolution is we are going to become like literally a human robot. It's going to be a cyborg literal scenario, because we're not happy just being human. And what's that going to create in us? Where are we going to go? All of that. So it's kind of the what he calls the final stage of our human evolution is a transhumanism version of ourself, where we try to stop being human and we become like the gods. And then, of course, transgenderism is the same kind of thing, actually. It's trying to take control of your body.
An unwillingness to accept the limits of my humanity.
Yes.
As God designed. Ontology.
Yes. And it's actually very similar to ancient Gnosticism, which said, you know, your spirit, your flesh is nonsense. Your flesh is garbage. Just shuffle off this mortal coil and move on, as Shakespeare said, right? So it's like your soul is really what matters. Your spirit is what matters. And of course, you know, if that's the case, then this is whatever, whatever, that can just disappear. You can adapt that. It doesn't matter. Who you are is what you feel. Well, that's Gnosticism, right? And so who you are is what you feel, of course, a very dangerous thing because what you feel can change at any moment. Our feelings sometimes can't be trusted, and they certainly shouldn't necessarily be the authoritative paradigm out of which we live our life.
Yes.
But we now live in a culture that says, no, you absolutely, the physical world has no hint to who you truly are. Your identity has nothing to do with your physical world. So you can adapt it, you can change it. Who you only are is what you feel. And of course, all of us know that there's a ton of limitations in that argument.
Yes.
Because of course, when does that end? Does that end in ageism?
Yeah.
When I'm now identifying as, you know, this is a whole other can of worms we can enter into.
But it's all fascinating.
Right? Am I 14 years old because I want to try to get into California Adventure Park cheaper?
Yep.
Can I be a different race? So in Canada, it's a true story. My friend during the vaccine, you know, we all had to get vaccines to leave our house or whatever back then, or to go to a restaurant or whatever. So my friend needed to travel. And so he called up and he said, can I get a vaccine? It was this particular vaccine that he wanted that his wife told him that's the only healthy one or whatever. So he's like, all right, whatever, I got to get this vaccine. So he calls the place, can I get the vaccine? Well, the First Nations people in Canada were the only people they were the first people to be able to get that vaccine. And so the woman said, well, we're actually out of that, you know, brand. And then she said, and he said, okay, fine. He went to hang up and she said, but wait a minute, are you First Nations? Like Indigenous? I don't know what you call them. And he said, well, no, because he's a 40-year-old white, bald German man. And she goes, are you identifying as one today?
Oh my.
Now think about that for a second. This oppressed, marginalized people group, you can just decide because it helps you out this afternoon, just decide to be one. Yeah, sure I'm that. And he goes in, they get, you know, whatever, move on with his life. Obviously, we all see the limitations in this principle when you start extrapolating it out to life. And it needs to be talked about, and not in like a judgment, none of that. Just let's everyone take a breath and calm down because we don't know where. And we see it, the breakdown when sports or, you know, there's all kinds of like versions of this where we're so early into the conversation. I think everyone just needs to have a lot of grace and a lot of this. Everyone take a breath and all of that. So anyway, I think that's one of the chapters that may raise some conversation.
I love it's very insightful. When I remember Carl Trueman in his book, what's his newest book, his big one? I forget what it's called. The Triumph of the Modern Self.
Yes.
But he talks about the replacement today of no longer talking about the soul. We talk about the self.
Yeah.
The self is
self is
the soul.
Psychology is the new religion.
Yes.
So that I have a whole chat. There's a lot of Truman or even Philip Reif, which Truman draws a bunch on, Ernest Becker. There's all these kind of psychology that come in and basically say, it used to be, you know, there's been these different phases, right? There was like the philosophical man. There was the Middle Ages was the religious man. There was the scientific man. And now there's the psychological man, where this is now the era we're in. Psychology is the new religion. You can solve yourself, and to really, truly solve. So the whole thesis of my book is like one of the opening lines is John Calvin. The opening line of the Institutes, which I'm sure you've memorized.
Yes.
Opening line of Calvin.
Well, I'll show you. All true knowledge of self is connected to God, and all true knowledge of God is connected to self.
Okay,
something like
very
that, right?
Close. Yeah,
close.
You read the second German translation. I was reading the French translation.
That's right.
Which basically there's two kinds of. The opening line is there's two kinds of knowledge: the knowledge of God and the knowledge of ourselves. So one of the thesis of my book is in the elevator pitch is like, if my first two books were about God, this one's about the second kind of knowledge, which is a whole book about the knowledge of ourselves, which we tend to shy away from. Like the books that stack in your library, we've been writing about God for thousands and thousands of years as the church. and we're afraid to write about ourselves.
Well, then that space gets taken up by Carl Jung and
exactly
and
all
Freud
the secular
and Nietzsche
psychology
and all of
exactly,
that. Yes.
Yeah. So all Christians like freak out. They're like, you listen to the Enneagram, and they get all freaked out. And it's because we're not used to going, I got to figure out my own soul. Who am I? What is this? What does it mean to be human?
Yep.
And Calvin's saying, you got to do both. And so this book is like, okay, what if I really just spent 3 years reading everything I could, taking all my experiences of life and jamming them into one book about that second kind of knowledge, that second kind of exploration. We've got God. Now we got to figure out ourselves. Yeah.
Well, and even as you're talking, one of the thoughts I'm having just as a pastor is this might be an incredible book for parents. And what I'm thinking is like, because I'm thinking, man, so many parents, myself included, I've now got a middle schooler. I know you've got 3 daughters.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are wondering, man, I'm growing up in a world that, my kids are growing up in a world I didn't grow up in. And I don't know social media. I don't know the iPhone. I don't know the dating today. I don't know all the stuff that's being taught in schools. And would you say like this is a book that you could see parents with teenagers going, man, if they read this, they're going to be able to understand? Because part of it is 100%. We don't know how to talk to our kids about what we believe and what others believe and how they... Yeah,
I think so. My first reader, which is one of the girls I work with at Bayside, and she's probably 27. She read it and she's like, "This is the book I need to then sit with my secular friend who believes all the stuff that you articulate this argument and then start to kind of punch holes a little bit." This is the book we need to read together. And then every week we need to go for coffee and go, okay, what do you think? Because I grew up in a non-Christian world. Everybody in my family is not a Christian. So who I have as a conversation partner is my family. My family that says, one of the things I talk about in the book is, the whole like, we need to protect SeaWorld. We can't do SeaWorld because the whales in there are they're struggling in there, right? We got.
I don't know if that's how they word it, but yes, the whales are struggling. Right? We can't do SeaWorld. Yes.
SeaWorld's struggling. Whales are struggling. We got to stop going and killing the sharks for soup.
Yeah.
And we got to stop cutting down these trees. Okay, great. Fully agree with you. The whales are struggling. However, do you think there's a God? No. That's a stupid idea. Okay, so then let's extract this out for a second. Based on what hermeneutic of morality are you telling me that I can't go shoot whales for fun? Mm-hmm. Based on what? I love shark fin soup. I should cut up all the sharks. I should do anything I want to the trees. Some people like their trees standing up, giving us oxygen. Other people like them just hacked down and thrown in the garbage and burn them for fun and for paper. Who are you to tell me any different? What version of existence and meaning and purpose of this universe are you coming from and telling me that I can't kill whales and sharks and do anything I want? You have no argument for absolute moral ideas without an absolute moral being. Everything else is utilitarian. Everything else is based on your evolutionary experience, because of course that's what they believe. They believe that any kind of moral compass that you have in your brain only came about through 1 million or 2 million years of us making decisions to get our, kin into the next, that's all, all we are. Well, if that's the case, there's no reason for a lot of the moral things we believe. You can kill and rape people. Sometimes it's good for your tribe. What does that matter? Who cares? So one of the conversations is like, it raises this question of, and one of the themes that runs through the whole book is if you take God, this is why the front of the book is the creation of Adam, Michelangelo.
I've seen the picture, yeah.
So it's like, if you take God out of the equation, all meaning and purpose and joy becomes subjective and evaporates, which is why, we have a lot of, so anyway, so it's a super helpful book in regard to, yes, sitting down going, okay, now I know how to talk to my teenage kid or the worldview that my teenage kid's living in every single day. Now I've got a book that goes, okay, we got something that we can read together, or you read it and go, now I start to understand it. And here's some either arguments against it, or at least some questions to raise that make people go, okay, maybe God makes more sense than because my family all thought I was stupid when I started believing God.
Yeah.
Right. You believe in God, but so these conversations are like, well, what do you believe in? Well, nothing. So what happens after you die? Nothing. Okay. Based on what? Based on what?
Yeah.
That's a faith position.
Yeah.
That's a faith. So what do you mean it's not a faith position? So what's it based on? Your experience? Have you died? No. Okay. So has anyone died and come back and told you there's nothing? All that happens when you die is you cease to exist. How do you know that? Yeah. Well, so you make fun of me as a faith position. So my grandmother dies. I go home. We're all gathered around. And one of my cousins says, at least she's not suffering anymore. How do you know? How do you know that Nanny's not suffering more now than she was a week ago? How do you know that? That's a faith position.
Yep.
Of which you have no proof. You just came up with it because you and your friends were sitting around eating SpaghettiOs.
She's in a better place.
She's in a better. What do you mean how do you know she's not in an awful place? Based on what? At least my worldview is informed by a guy named Jesus, who history says he did exist. And there's a lot of good secular work that says he probably rose from the dead. What? If that actually happened, holy smokes, the universe is, all of it. So.
Wow. Okay. So I want to ask a couple last questions. How do you write a book? So because I'm fascinated with these books, and actually one other thing I want to say beforehand, because most of our listeners are going to be people in our church at Two Cities. I think that all three of these books are great books. We're really trying to. One of our things we do here is we say we want to take personal risks to bring Christ to every relationship.
Yeah, I love that.
And so we always are trying to ask, who's that one person who's far from God, close to us? But what happens in a lot of those relationships is we have that one conversation. I always describe it as we have that one conversation, and no matter who it's with, it's always a C-.
Right, yes,
no matter what, you're like, I'm going to talk to my dad, and at Christmas, I'm getting my mom or my brother, and then you have it, you're like, it was like a C-. It was so awkward.
Right.
And then we don't know what to do. And it's like, I don't know, how do I have the same conversation? All I'm saying is, I know there's other resources, and you didn't ask me to do this, but I'm just recommending your books as something to mediate the conversation. I love it. Like I can't tell you how many times I did ministry for 4 years at Duke, and how many times I used the book, The Reason for God, or tools like that, or even John Stott's Basic Christianity. Just walk, hey, let's just have these conversations. Let's look at the claims and the character of Christ. Let's look at the resurrection of Christ.
Love it.
So, but I'm interested, just a couple last things. Number one, when you write a book, did you already preach these ideas? Does this come out of your preaching ministry, or will you now write this and then you'll preach on this?
Yeah, not this one.
Okay.
This one will be that. I'll preach on it. We'll do a series on this at Bayside when the book comes out.
Great.
The other two they started in very seed form as sermons I'd preach. So on these topics, hell, suffering, the first book. And then I take that, and then I just start to write. So for me, preaching and writing are vastly different disciplines. I think there are some preachers out there who I can, when I read their books, I go, someone just took their sermon, they transcribed it, they read it once through, and now it's a book. That's not my style. Like I was a writer more before I was a preacher. So to me, there's such vastly different disciplines that writing to me, like even if someone transcribed a sermon I wrote on or preached on suffering, it would take me 4 or 5 months to blow all that up, read a ton, to make it an actual chapter on suffering. So the first book started there as a seed. And the second and third books, no, they were just like, okay, what would I write a book on Jesus? Of course, I've been reading about him for 25 years. Take everything I've read, all the stories that illustrate it, all the things, just like we're preachers. So every 3 minutes, there's an illustration. There's some way to frame this.
Yes.
And so even though I got Christine Kane and Carrie Newhoff and Bob Goff to write endorsements for the third book. And Christine Kane came back and she's just like, bro, the way you open and close this book are the two craziest stories I've ever heard in my life. And it really is a way to like bring people into something, an experience that happened to me, a true experience. I'll actually tell the stories tonight at the conference. But they're a way to kind of, okay, this is something that happened that it's almost unbelievable, but there's all kinds of principles around it, and so you're taking that thing, and that's what writing, that draws people in. You got to illustrate it in real life and all that. Anyway, all that to say, no, so each of these books probably took me 3 years each to write it, where I got it to a place where, and there's not good writing, there's only good rewriting. And so like I rewrote these every chapter 40 times, I love the details. I'm going to shift that word over here, and I don't like that word. This word sounds funnier than that word because it ends with a k versus a. No, but that's
dude, you are creative. Come on.
But that's preaching, right?
Yeah.
But that's like when you listen, and you know this. You've listened to Rogan and all these guys enough where they talk about comedy and certain words, the phonetically how they hit your ear, all of that stuff, and it's the same with writing. There's a way of writing where it will connect these things to all of that. So it's about the rewriting and just the obsessive work to be done to get it to where you think it's as good as it can be, and then you launch it out in the world, and that's it.
See what happens. Let's go.
You're done.
Yeah,
because the edits are over. Like Zondervan's like, bro, you got to stop editing. It's already been designed. It's locked. Yeah. And then they send me the design, and I'm hacking things. I'm moving chapters around. No, that word's gone. And they're like, no, what are you doing? Like, it's over. I'm like, no, it's not over until February 18th when that book comes out.
Are you still working on it at some level?
I'm sitting out there this morning. I'm going to move that word over there. Yeah.
Okay. Last thing I want to talk to you about, I want to kind of end on a personal note. So we've talked, although we've been personal the whole time, we've talked about, a little bit about your background. How'd you come to Christ? Church planting, pastoring, book writing. One thing, and I think that you're going to mention this tonight, but just experience of you, first of all, growing up in a non-Christian home, but then having Tourette's.
Yeah.
Talk to us for just a few minutes.
What's that? Wow.
Talk to us just a little bit. I mean, how much, I'm wondering, some of your suffering in life, some of the things that you've gone through, how has that shaped you, and how has that caused you to be the kind of pastor and person you are today?
Yeah, great question. Yeah, I mean, I don't have a ton of time, but yeah, well, the divorce of my parents, the trauma of that gave me Tourette's when I was about 10. And I did all the stuff, like all the classic stuff you see on YouTube, all the swearing, out loud at people, and just stand there.
So it was so traumatic, your parents' divorce, that's what
did it. So I would just throw F-bombs around at people and S-bomb, like every bomb, every
bomb,
every this and
swear words we've never even heard of before. You
just making them. I would just scream at people. I'd be sitting at like my my grade. I'd be like high school, and all the people would be gathered in the auditorium to do like a math test or something for an hour, and have to be dead silent. Well, someone with Tourette's, you do not want dead silence. And so you're sitting there and you're trying to do like the word, whatever. You're just like saying random swear words. So it's like, that was my life growing up. And then it developed when I was about 15, 16, when my dad passed away. It developed into obsessive compulsive disorder. So
whoa.
What I would start to do is I'd start to like do certain things that if I didn't do those things, like you would get AIDS or something. Like that's literally how as I'm sitting.
I have to do certain things, or else Kyle's going to get hurt or something.
Yes. Or I'm going to, you got to. So I touch this a certain amount of times, and if I didn't touch it 14 times, if I didn't. And
I don't mean to laugh, just the way you're telling the story.
Really, but you're laughing.
I'm so compassionate toward you.
So,
but yeah.
So there was a season of my life, no joke, where like every 3 minutes, I would have to bang my knees on the ground. Like I'd be standing and I'd go boom, 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 and I'd throw my hat in the air. And I was a smoker in Toronto, so my knees in the snow all winter. I'd be walking around my high school with these big friggin' wet knees. What's up, players? Whatever. And so that was a hard. So the joke I make when I'm preaching this story is like, the one job you're never going to get in life when you randomly throw F-bombs around at people is a preacher. That's right. This is not going to work any, it's like, welcome to two cities, F you, get in a freaking small group. So it's like, and so I had all these crazy habits. So, but God, took that and redeemed it and was there a big transition?
Yes, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but was there a big transition in even just how Tourette's was affecting you once you came to Christ? Because you're talking, it sounds like it got really bad around 15, 16, 17. You come to Christ at 18.
Yeah.
How have you seen the grace of God? Obviously, you're not hitting your knees every 3 minutes anymore.
Yeah, by the grace of God.
Yeah.
And that had to do like some of my theology around the sovereignty of God, some of my mind games I was playing with myself.
Interesting.
But the way I think about it is, it's like Paul's thorn in the flesh, where he's like, "Can you just take this from me, please?" And I've like, God, just take this. When I was preaching at Village, I mean, half of our campuses, well, all of our campuses were on video. Half of them were in movie theaters, which means I was 20 feet tall in these movie theaters across Canada. Well, I'm twitching my face around, doing nonsense. Like, God, just take this away. It's going to be easier for the audience to pay attention to a preacher that their face ain't smashing around and they're doing weird noises into the microphone.
Yeah.
And my body's twitching around. This is dumb.
Yeah.
And it's like he just said, no, because when you look small, I look big.
Powerful.
You know, I'm going to keep that little thorn in your flesh there, bro, because when you baptize 96 people at the drop of a hat in a moment, no one's going to think it's you because you're up there twitching around like a moron. And it's like, okay, this is 1 Corinthians 1. God's going to use the moronic things of the world to flip some people's brains. And what it's done is it's given people permission not to be perfect.
Yes.
So I started this church in this perfect little area full of perfect people, all rich, $4 million houses everywhere in this little elementary school. Everyone pulls up in Beamers and whatever. I plant this church there and people just start coming in droves. And it's like 2 services becomes 3 services, becomes this, becomes this, becomes this. It goes into this performing arts center, thousands and thousands of people. But it didn't make any sense.
Yep.
Because all these perfect people. And what I started realizing as I was going out with them for lunch, and they're like, you gave me permission to be imperfect. Just by you being up there and twitching around and yelling at everybody. Like, you gave me permission. And I would talk about my mental stuff, and I'd talk about my obsessive compulsive, and I use illustrations, and people would come up and they go, I've never heard anyone, that's what goes on in my brain, and I never knew that anyone else in the world thought like that, and people are weeping, and just the freedom that it gave people to not have their life together.
Yeah.
And anyway, so God has used that in a powerful way, and to be dead honest, I talk about this in the book, that suffering. You asked me like what it did for, like, I think it made me into the kind of person who I obviously we all care what people think of us, but there is a piece of me that has grown like a skin that's a little bit like, I don't care.
Yep.
I just don't really care what you think. And I kind of know my limitations. I know what I'm here to do. I know what I'm not here to do. I'm not good at everything. I'm not going to pretend to be everybody's friend. I'm not going to pretend I can save you and I'm going to be the best guy to do whatever you think a pastor is supposed to do. I'm just this niche thing that's like me, and I'm not trying to be anybody else. And I really don't care that I'm not your pastor that you had 3 times ago. And I'm not I'm not any of these people that you want me to be. That's about you. What I am is I got these 2 or 3 things I'm good at.
Yes.
And God kind of took that obsessive compulsive brain, like take it back to what we were just talking about the writing. He took the brokenness and he applied it to this.
Come on.
And now I'm obsessed with every phrase, and I can't read a book without going to read every footnote and like, okay, and then preaching. I just sit there and I rehearse every phrase, and the story goes here and then it goes there and it goes. And so when I get to talk to preachers, I'll sit with them and they'll tell me their whole process, and I'll be like, well, here's the problem. Here's why you're not a 10. Here's why you're settling at a 6. Because you're not working hard enough. And they're like, well, what is the working hard enough? I mean, I'm talking about you're in a closet preaching this thing out loud for 5 hours before you're ever up in front of people. And they're like, I don't have the time for that. And I'm like, right. And that's why you're going to be a 6. Whereas my world was like, I said goodbye to my family at 5 p.m. every Saturday, and I grind for like 6 hours. Then I grind at 5 in the morning. And I did that when I was preaching in front of 100 people.
Yes.
Forget thousands. And so I think that God kind of applied this weird, obsessive, compulsive, like, I'm going to make sure this is in order and I don't like that being there and DDD. And it's like, but what if it could be applied to like how you read the Bible and how you preach to people and how, all of that. So anyway, so write books, whatever. So
dude, what a powerful way to end, man. I mean, honestly, I'm so grateful for you. Thank you.
Dude, I'm grateful for you. You are killing it out here, by the way. I want to turn the podcast over and just talk about you. I hate sitting there talking about myself.
I have loved it. Thank you. Thank you for saying yes. Thank you for coming all the way from California.
Excited to be
Thank
here,
you for bringing a gospel-centered message that I know you're going to bring tonight about a perfect God using imperfect people.
Yeah.
And thanks for your story, man, and your example that you've been and the friendship that we've had. If you are listening or watching this podcast, I want you to look up Mark Clark. I want you to go to Amazon. I want you to get his books, and I want you to be strengthened in your faith and help others to do the same. I'll see you next time.